Okay. We will open the floor to questions from the media. The cardinal rule is please identify yourself and the media entity you come from. So let's start the ball rolling. Members of the media, we have from Bloomberg and Associated Press. We also have from the DFA Press Corps. We also have columnists with us. Mentong Laurel, you have a question, please? Please approach the microphone. Microphone, please. Please use the microphone, Mentong. Mas maganda na yan.
Kamentong po, no? Herman T. Laurel, Tribune, Opinion, GNN. There is an appeal to nationalism, patriotism with regards to this issue. But there is also this fact that we have a bilateral with the U.S. And that seems to be it, not a diversified foreign relations as Vietnam has. Vietnam already has joint ventures with Russian companies exploiting the oil in the disputed territories. I think before we appeal to patriotism against China or these negotiations, let's look into ourselves, because my first question is our Department of Foreign Affairs Secretary an American citizen or a green card holder? We'll never expect a crystallized foreign policy position that's good for the country if that suspicion continues to hang over our Department of Foreign Affairs. So we can holler all that we want. I think the bottom line has been stated. At the end of the day, you have to go to bilaterals. Why are they obstructing bilateral? Why is this foreign secretary obstructing the bilateral? Why? That is the big question.
Would anybody care to answer the question of our friend Mentong? There's nobody from DFA though to answer it. Okay. So, but we have noted your sentiments and your views. Okay? From Associated, yes, please.
Tess Ramiro, Catholic Media Network. This is addressed to Mr. Santa Romana. Kasi ang nakita kong commonality, yung tatlo, babad sa Pilipinas pa. Kayo, ang observation is from the point of view of from a foreign land. Ang tingin ko sana, ano yung pananaw ninyo ngayon as an outsider viewing in sa nangyayari sa Pilipinas and a former writer sa Beijing ng takbo ng Pilipinas sa pakikitungo sa China? Tama ba ang pinatutunguhan natin? Tama ba at tayo ba'y nasa tuwid na daan? What's your take on that? Salamat.
This is not so simple to answer kasi we live within certain historical conditions, and I retired from ABC in Beijing in 2010. I only came back late 2010, and I saw the change in our policy. One is, I think, basically the shift in Philippine foreign policy from the GMA administration to the Aquino administration is driven by what you said, yung tuwid na daan. Unfortunately, the projects with the Chinese during the GMA administration, ZTE, North Rail, JMSU, got involved in scandals, big scandals. So, in the policy review, to have an honest government, all of this got thrown away. Ang question is, did the baby get thrown away with the water? No. And this is really the tough part. And I think what's happened is that we have swung from the GMA foreign policy. Now we are trying another approach. Wittingly or unwittingly, wisely or unwisely, rightly or wrongly, we have landed on the path of confrontation. Why? Because we put the issue of sovereignty front and center. And if there is one country that takes a challenge to their sovereignty very seriously, it is China. So I think there may have been not sufficient calculation, and I think this is borne out by events. We did not expect the Chinese to react this way because we thought we were only asserting what is legitimately ours. And somehow there was not enough consideration that this would be taken, rightly or wrongly, by the Chinese as a challenge to their sovereignty. And one other thing we may not have calculated correctly. The Chinese, after the global financial crisis, readjusted their foreign policy. They started to review Deng Xiaoping's former policy of hide and bide. Let me explain. Deng Xiaoping, after the collapse of the Berlin Wall, the collapse of the Soviet Union, faced a unipolar world. The US was in a very dominant position, and Deng Xiaoping was afraid that what happened to the Soviet Union would happen to China. So he came up with a guideline. Let us hide our swords first. Itago muna natin ang ating espada. And let us bide our time, take a low profile, and have an accommodating policy towards the US and towards the West, and use the good relations with the West to build up China's economy, concentrate on economic construction. And he was successful for 30 years. China was able to develop its economy and also became a military power. And then when the financial crisis came, Deng Xiaoping was already dead, his successors and the strategic thinkers in China did a policy review, a strategic review, and they said the unipolar world is now declining. A multipolar world is emerging. China and the rest of the BRICS, as well as Russia, India, they are now gaining more power in the international community. So because of this, they said now is the time to be assertive in international affairs. So they were going on an assertive phase. In terms of the South China Sea, before, if we arrested the fishermen in Panatag Shoal, all they could do was to file diplomatic protests because their navy was not so powerful. They did not build yet their maritime forces. But since the past 10 years, they have built up their maritime forces. And since 2010, they gave a warning actually, but we didn't pay attention to it, that no longer will we allow our fishermen to be arrested in the territories that they consider as theirs. In other words, the disputed areas. The first case that we know is Japan, in the ramming of the Japanese Coast Guard by a Chinese fishing vessel in 2010. The Chinese fisherman was arrested by the Japanese, and the Chinese acted madly. I mean, they reacted in a very hysterical fashion. They cut off the export of rare metals to Japan to pressure Japan. They canceled the summit meetings, and the Japanese had to return or to release the Chinese captain. The basic reason of the Chinese then is that if we allow the Chinese captain to be arrested, it is like yielding sovereignty. The same principle applied. So my point is, we have now filed, the reason we filed an arbitration case is because of what happened in Panatag Shoal. There was an agreement to withdraw. We withdrew. Unfortunately, the other side did not withdraw. There were appeals for the Chinese to withdraw, return to the status quo ante, but it did not happen. And so when the time came, out of frustration for that ineffective bilateral negotiations with the Chinese, they resorted to a multilateral, the arbitration case. The problem now is, will we win this case? Because we have put our eggs, so to speak, in this basket. So if you ask me, is there room for other things? I think there is still room for diplomacy. Not necessarily, because what the Chinese want is bilateral only. Drop your arbitration. That is now too late. But you can still combine the two through diplomacy, through diplomatic direct talks. What we still don't have with the new Chinese administration, we still don't have a one-to-one talks between our foreign secretary and the foreign minister, who is new in his position, but he is a veteran in Asian affairs, and he is actually considered a moderate when it comes to this issue. His name is the one on the Declaration of Conduct in the South China, the DOC, signed in 2002. It was Wang Yi, as Vice Foreign Minister, who was deployed or who was assigned by the Chinese government there to go and sign. So he is quite well versed with the aspect of the peaceful settlement of dispute. And he is trying to strike a moderate position. Unfortunately, when we decided to file our case, the new government was not yet in place. And there was no way China was going to change its position when an old government was going to be replaced by a new government. So we have started our move, the Chinese government changed, and there is also room for high-level diplomacy because our president, President Pinoy, still has not met the new president of China. You have to have a measure of the man. The two have to meet. Even Obama and Xi Jinping spent 2 days together in California. Xi Jinping had more hours with Obama than either Abe or Pinoy put together. Why? Because the U.S., actually this is one place that actually we have to learn from our treaty ally. That you combine not only deterrence or hedging strategy, you combine it with engagement. You have to talk. Although we filed our case, we still have to carry out diplomatic talks with the Chinese leaders. So that is what I mean, that not necessarily the bilateral negotiations that the Chinese want as the only method, but we continue with our arbitration, but we continue with the diplomatic, high-level diplomacy with China. Because these are new leaders who are still consolidating their hold in power and who you could still influence through personal persuasion, through personal diplomacy. So that's what I have to say for now.
Chito, let me ask you this. You mean to tell us with what you said that the Philippines missed the boat? Because if Jumilis Maturan won because of timing, then we are out of tune.
Well, we have already had several missed opportunities. Let me tell you why. 2006, the Chinese, 1996, the Chinese ratified the UNCLOS. We had 10 years to 2006. It's only in 2006 that they filed their reservations that they will not agree to compulsory dispute settlement. We had 10 years. We missed that window of opportunity to file our case, and the Chinese would be forced to go to the ITLOS tribunal. Now, they have their reservations in place, and their basic defense to our arbitration case is that arbitration covers issues on which on which China has already filed its reservations. So there is a real legal doctrine here that is involved, and we will know the judgment soon, I think, on the issue of jurisdiction. Even if we surmount the issue of jurisdiction, there is still the tedious process that could take 3 to 4 years on whether we win our case. What do you do in the meantime? Do we wait and twiddle our thumbs? You cannot. You have to engage the Chinese. You have to talk to them. So the point is, there will be opportunities in September when the Philippines is host in the ASEAN-China Trade Fair in late September. The Philippines has to send a top leader to open that trade fair, since we are the host. It is an opportunity to meet the Chinese leader, most likely the Chinese premier. And then early October, there is the APEC summit in Indonesia, in Bali. And soon after, there is the East Asian summit in Brunei, all for the heads of state. Pinoy will be there, Obama will be there, Xi Jinping will be there. It is time, I think, if both sides would agree to have summit meetings on the sidelines and discuss. So that Pinoy will have a measure of Xi Jinping, and Xi Jinping will also hear directly. Because right now, all they know is what their vice foreign minister said or their foreign minister said, and no direct contact. They don't know exactly how the other side is thinking at the highest level.
Thank you very much. Senator Shahani, please.
Well, I think what Chito has said is very important because we have to learn how to engage China. We have to, this is the first time we have been so used to engaging Uncle Sam, Spain. Tapos na yun eh. Now it is China where we get our pancit, our siopaw, where all of our taipans came from. Henry C., Lucio Tan, Gokong Wei, etc. All the billionaires, no? Is China really our enemy? That is what Filipinos have to be clear about. All of us have Chinese blood anyway, even we Ilocanos. Are we really going to fight them? So I think Chito has said a very important thing. We have to engage China, who could be the superpower of the world after America. Okay, those days of American hegemony are over. But there are also many ways to skin a cat. And although we are engaging with a superpower, we are not also basta-basta, the Philippines. And this is what you've got to know. We are an archipelago. China is not. And we've got to define, we've got to know the law of the sea. So some of you really should be maritime experts in this, because this is going to be our biggest foreign policy issue. And Filipinos really don't care about foreign policy. You know, when I go to the Senate, oh, you're good for pang-international ka lang eh. They would tell me, wala ka naman sa domestic. Para yung international, baliwala. But now, our domestic is threatened by the international, our own survival as a republic. And this is why I'm also for engaging China. I cannot just take it lying down just because China is not going to talk to us. We have to learn to see what are our advantages. And there's no contradiction between what Chito is saying and what I'm saying. What are our advantages? Although we are weaker, okay, but world opinion can be for us, because we want the rule of law to be now part of international law. Who wants to go into war anyway? And China knows that they will not win a war, even if they win it with their nuclear weapons. Nobody wants war now. We've been through it. I was a teenager when we were occupied by the Japanese. I really don't want anything of that now, and would not want any of my children or grandchildren to experience it. So war is out of the question. They can be aggressors, but we are facing really a more nonviolent world now. Then people to people, we have Facebook, Twitter. Okay, I mean the foreign minister cannot convince the Facebook, Twitter, etc., and social media now. That is why the Chinese government is also nervous. So let us tell your friends, who is the Chinese media anyway? Are they not under the People's Liberation Army? Are they not under the Communist Party? Are you not proud that we have a free press here for all of its imperfections? I think that we have to sort of say, where are we proud? What are we proud of as Filipinos? And let us fight for it in the world. And then we're an archipelago, etc. Then we have our overseas workers. Okay, they're all now protesting all over the world. But I've told Lloyd Lewis, please be a little careful that this doesn't look like a Phil-Am American-inspired event when you protest in front of the UN. That this is really a Filipino-inspired event, you see. But we do have also a global, if China is a global power, we also have our global network. This is what I'm trying to say. You don't have to take it lying down. Mm-hmm. And it's about time Filipinos get up and say, what do we have in our armory to defend ourselves? Thank you.
Parang narinig ko yung sinasabi po ng kapatid nyo, kaya natin ta. All right. Yes.
very shortly, in addition to Chito's excellent description of the China situation, I think another factor that we have to realize in understanding China's foreign policy is that since the explosion of the capitalist energy of China since Deng Xiaoping, there has been an ideological vacuum in that country, and communism has lost the vigor and traction that it used to have. So what has replaced that? What replaced that is popular nationalism. And with the increasing privatization of the Chinese media, you can see how cyber nationalism has also been a very potent force in even pushing a lot of top Chinese generals to write very hawkish books and even encouraging Mr. Xi Jinping to play a much more hardline card. So popular nationalism is one issue that influences Chinese foreign policy. But the last thing I want to say on this issue is that nonetheless, as Chito correctly points out, while Hu Jintao and Jiang Zemin had power struggle for quite a while, and that made foreign policy decision making a little bit difficult, this time Xi Jinping consolidated power in a fairly swift manner. And that has allowed China to push, for instance, for a very difficult structural economic reform, the so-called Leakeconomics under Li Keqiang. And in the same vein, I can argue that because power is much more consolidated under Xi Jinping, China is in a stronger position to put a leash in this explosion of popular nationalism, which has been driving this hawkish foreign policy of China in the last 5 or 10 years.
Do we have questions from the floor before we have Senator Shani present something about... Oh, okay. Do you have a short presentation, Jay? Para mas makita yung ma-appreciate yung tayo ng Pilipinas. Mintong, sige, kami tong.
You know, it's very difficult for a commentator, opinion writer to ask questions because we have so many opinions, but I'll discipline myself. Ma Keqing, the ambassador now, just a day or two ago, expressed this sentiment asking if the Philippines will meet China halfway. Is that a signal that maybe the Philippine side should open or should be now more open to discussion with the Chinese counterparts?
For whom?
All of you.
Actually, this is quite noticeable, and I want to explain the background. No? The Chinese, although we have been asking the Chinese since last year to bring the case to ITLOS, and the Chinese turned us down, so they had an idea that we wanted international legal education. What they did not expect was that we will find a way to do it without their consent. That there is the Annex 7 of UNCLOS that allows one side to unilaterally file the case. They were expecting that by not agreeing, they could stop it from going to ITLOS. So I think they were taken aback. Since then, of course, international public opinion has, in a sense, put pressure on the Chinese that why are you not going to it, joining this case? Defend yourself. In other words, submit yourself to an international court if you are convinced of your position. So the Chinese really had to think about their strategy. Of course, looking back, there was no way they could change their position right away because they didn't have a government in place, a new government in place. So a change of policy really needs a regime that is totally consolidated and confident of its position, because you are changing a policy that has been outstanding since 1949, when China was not included in the UN. It was Taiwan that had the membership. But China was slowly adjusting. There are now Chinese judges that are part of ICJ and ITLOS. So they are obviously trying to study it from inside. And they have agreed now to arbitration under World Trade Organization when it comes to trade and investment cases. So economic cases, I think they have already crossed the hurdle. They have mounted a hurdle. But when it comes to political cases, cases involving what they consider to be issues of sovereignty, they're not yet ready. Now, is it a signal? So the Chinese have been trying to put forward the message to ASEAN and to the world that they are willing to go halfway and willing to open the door to bilateral. The only problem with this, as I said, is how sincere is this or how valid is this? I think the Philippine side should test it. The problem, however, with the Chinese position is that we've tried it for, as the DFA has said, for 15 to 18 years, and it was not effective in making them withdraw from Mischief Reef. And then last year we had numerous meetings with them, and again, not effective in making them withdraw from Scarborough, from Bajo de Masinloc. So in other words, I think aside from saying or signaling by words that they are willing to meet halfway, what is needed is concrete deeds. Go back to the status quo ante as of April. The Philippines may have had its own problems by using a Navy ship to try to arrest the fishermen, and by trying to not taking heed of the Chinese warning ahead of time that they will resist any arrest involving fishermen. We thought we could still do it in the way we were doing it the past 10 years. Now it is clear you cannot do it the old way. So we have to wait for not only signaling through words, but actually through deeds, but it should actually encourage our leadership to try high-level diplomacy and take up their offer and see if they can offer any deal or any headway, at least to lower the temperature or at least to make sure that everything is done peacefully so that we can at least hold on to what we have. Because for a while I thought we would also lose Ayungin Shoal. But the challenge now is really to hold on to what we have and to use diplomacy to do that.
Because I think Jay might have more recent slides than I, so I'll give him my time. But I'd like to say something because we are really engaged in a kind of a debate now. Okay, let's pay attention to China. Let's listen to the Chinese ambassador, Madame Ma. Are they now going to accommodate a little? This is what I'm trying to say. It takes two to tango in diplomacy. It's not only the Chinese now who should be telling us what to do. We Filipinos must put our own act together. Okay. Of course, the Chinese will not take us seriously. Why not? Who is really announcing policy on the South China Sea? Do you really know? Well, you have asked whether the Del Rosario is an American ambassador. Well, he better not be if the chief spokesperson of the president and the head of the premier department for international relations. I don't want to go into that. But the reason why we have had so many territorial disputes which we cannot really solve is that this government cannot put its act together. I'm not blaming Pinoy. It goes all the way back even to Marcos's and including Ramos, you see. I'm not saying that. But we're giving you this paper because this is really the white paper that the West Philippine Sea Group, which included Jay, put out. Some of you may have read it. But one of the reasons we're appealing here is the Philippine government has to put its own act together. Who is really coring maritime disputes? Is it DFA? No. Marina says we are the ones, Defense says we are the ones, the Navy says we are the ones, Coast Guard says we are the ones. Whom do you listen to? You see, and now the former head of Navy, former Admiral Palma, is now in Malacanang. We are saying that there should be somebody at the highest level, a former military admiral or diplomat, who will now gather all of these issues on shipping, maritime, fishing, seaweed, jellyfish, etc., Lingayen Gulf, Poro Point, put them all together and advise the president on a long-term basis. That person should not be assigned abroad like the Indonesians did. Only one person did the law of the sea for Indonesia. This is why they're more advanced than we are. O DFA people, they go abroad. 3 years, they don't like the Philippines. They want to go abroad. Ayun to earn dollars nung araw, to see the world, to make my child have an American education. That is our foreign policy. Now, who talks about when you are, I listen to TV every night just to respect out of media. Is it Mr., what's his name, the DFA spokesperson?
Raul Hernandez.
Huh?
Raul Hernandez.
Hernandez, but it's always OFW he's talking about. Is it Bilay? Always OFW. Abigail Balte, always saying the president is correct, but he is just misunderstood. You should really study more. La Cierta, there is no problem. So where are we enlightened? And this is really, we have to put our act together. I feel that the DFA should really give a press briefing every week to really tell you what is the score. Because, not because I've been a former ambassador, but an ambassador is an envoy extraordinary, an ambassador plenipotentiary to negotiate for the Philippine Republic. He is the only person who can do it. I'm sorry, Jay, you can't do it. Even if you are the head of the maritime, you can advise, you can criticize. But to have the full powers from the head of state to really negotiate the law of the sea, any Tom, Dick, and Harry can put its 2 cents worth.
Okay.
But when the Philippine Republic speaks, it must be taken seriously, ladies and gentlemen. And we have to put our act together. Let's not blame the Chinese first or the Americans. Let us look into ourselves. That's my main message today. Please, media, you have a very special role to play. Thank you.
We have a question from Bloomberg. Please.
Good morning. Senator Shahani, what do you think, are there any risks of U.S. involvement, whether real or perceived, in the South China Sea? And what do you think would be the wisest role for the U.S. to take in the territorial dispute?
You know, I'm slightly deaf, and I can't really hear all the decibels coming to me. Can you speak a little bit slowly and make maybe your question less complicated? You know what I mean? No? I mean, you all want, it is a very complex issue. Know how to slice this salami, please.
What do you think are the risks of U.S. involvement, whether real or perceived, in the South China Sea?
Oh,
and
big-
what do you think would be the wisest role for the U.S. to take in the...
Well, yeah, it has to, naturally there's this big rivalry between the US and China, and US should not exacerbate that. When Obama says they want a pivot in Asia, of course they'll say, oh, Philippines, small brother, always willing to obey us, okay? So they must avoid that. But they still can play a role because it is the only power really that Hu Jintao, I mean, what's his name, Xi Jinping will listen to, you see. But we also can have a voice. So I think a balancing, you see, not just winner-take-all mentality, you know. You see, for instance, okay, who are the Magnificent 12? Where are the Magnificent 12 of the Senate now? Did they know that China would be here? Now we want them back again. You see, that's what I don't understand. See, so we in foreign policy, and after all, our Constitution says we must forge an independent foreign policy. I'm so proud of that constitutional provision, with our national interest and sovereignty giving highest priority. That's very important. What's wrong with having an independent foreign policy? We should not be scared. Bonifacio fought with this bolo. See, so the risk, of course, in international relations, any unbalanced foreign influence is not healthy. There must be a balancing act all the time, you see, or else in the trapeze you're going to fall. So America, yes, America is a friend. We all speak English, we eat hot dogs, we go to the movies, Hollywood, we love it all, okay? So they'll come here. But we must also know how to keep America at the distance and say, okay, Uncle Sam, your battle, we have a common ground of battle, but between you and China, kayo na lang dalawa. Ganun dapat you see. So it's a sense of balancing, and I think a lot depends on Secretary Gasmin and Del Rosario.
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
Just one more question.
Yes,
for
please.
Mr. Haydarian.
Yes.
What do you think are the risks of an armed confrontation or clash in the South China Sea?
Honestly, I've been in conversation with some American military analysts, and their greater concern is what really happened in Senkaku and Diaoyu, because it seems that the Japanese and the Chinese have been sleepwalking to direct confrontation. Increasingly, you have Japanese jet fighters going into Japanese-controlled administered region. As far as the West Philippine or South China Sea is concerned, I think it's a less confrontational situation. But what we have is like a snail pace sleepwalking towards confrontation. Why am I saying that? In late 2012, the Chinese Defense Ministry announced that in the so-called Sansha City, I think it's Woody Island in English, they're going to elevate the they're going to upgrade the administrative region, which will govern most of the Paracel Islands and beyond. And it seems that for many military analysts, they're seeing that as part of China's strategy of building facts on the ground and expanding its military fortification in the ground. Why does that kind of hypothesis make sense? If you look at it since January, the Chinese have been sending an increasing number of flotillas, visiting, including places like Scarborough Shoal, and perhaps all the way also to the second Thomas Shoal, wherein we had almost, we had a very tense situation back in April. So what we have in the South China Sea is, because I feel the Chinese still do not see a direct military competition, because neither Philippines and Vietnam are really a threat, compared to what's happening in Senkaku, Diaoyu, the threat of direct confrontation is lower. But what is clearly happening is that the Chinese are building facts on the ground. They're expanding their military fortification in the region, increasing their flotillas going around the region. And if you look at from the language of international law, in a lot of cases, you will win a territorial dispute if you can exercise effective jurisdiction, effective and continuous jurisdiction. So I think the Chinese also have a long-term way of looking at this and saying that if we can exercise, we can send flotillas, we can expand our fortification, in the long run, we'll also be in a position to argue that we also have an effective exercise of jurisdiction over disputed territories. But in the short run, I don't really see any prospect for direct conflict. In fact, the Obama administration has been very clear that unlike the Carter administration and the Clinton administration, they do not feel that Philippines disputes with China should involve America based on our mutual defense treaty. But one thing that I think the Americans should emphasize is that they keep on talking about freedom of navigation in international waters. And that should be a basis for the Obama administration to encourage the Chinese to try to resolve the disputes through multilateral mechanisms. So I think that should be the language that the Americans should use. But unfortunately, both in the US-China strategic and economic dialogue, and before that in Sunnylands Ranch, when you have a sleeveless, confab between Obama and Xi Jinping, there was practically no discussion of ASEAN, nor the issues of the disputes there. So I think as far as the G2 relationship between China and US is concerned, unfortunately, the Obama administration is not staking too much political capital in resolving this issue diplomatically.
Okay. Jim, you have a question before we go to the presentation of Professor Jay? Yes, please.
I have a question. I think Chito has partly answered this. How can the Philippines engage with a China that, in the words of Chito, has a credibility problem? A China that has institutionalized its claim virtually to the entire South China Sea by establishing the Sansha City recently. My second question is, can you give us your fearless forecast of how the UNCLOS tribunal will rule on the Philippine case, arbitration case, in case it declares jurisdiction in a few weeks?
I'll take the first. I yield to the international law expert on the second.
It's going to be a challenge how to engage with China. But I think the overall objective is how to manage the dispute so that it can be resolved peacefully while expanding other areas of cooperation. And this is what I mean. If we put the dispute front and center, or the only thing we talk about every day, every night, every hour, then trade will suffer, investment will suffer, tourism will suffer. There is a big gap between the Philippines and China. We consider the Chinese to engage in bullying behavior. And if you talk to the Chinese, as we recently talked to some Shanghai scholars who were visiting here, and if you read the Chinese media, they consider the Philippines as the troublemaker in Southeast Asia. So we call them bully, they call us troublemaker. And this shows the big gap. So there is room, I think, for at least explaining why we call them bully. Not only through demonstrations in front of the Chinese embassy. Actually, my friend Rafi Alunan was inviting me to the West Philippine Coalition, and I said, Rafi, I am engaged in track 2 diplomacy, meaning people to people. Jay and I, part of a group of Filipino academics, the Philippine Association of Chinese Studies, we went to Beijing in April, and we met with the think tank, the intellectuals from the think tanks in the Shanghai Institute of International Studies, the China Institute of International Studies. These are think tanks that advise the government. So it's like track 2, unofficial. The advantage of this is you can discuss issues more frankly without involving, without staking sovereignty claim, or you're speaking on behalf of the government. So we were able to ask, what about this 9-dash line? What does it mean? We don't know what it means. If our ships, if our vessels were to cross the 9-dash line, are we entering Chinese territory? And we got at least 2 answers, which shows you that the Chinese are still debating the issue. They haven't reached a consensus. The moderate, and right now the reasonable position, which is closest to UNCLOS, is that the 9-dash line, if you look at it, are dashes. It is not a straight line that they use in the land borders where the borders are already defined. In other words, it shows where the borders are still undefined on the sea. And that they're claiming the territories, the islands, the geographic features, and the 12 miles around it. The only problem with that is in a letter to the UN in 2011, the Chinese officially said that the Spratlys are entitled not only to 12 miles, but also to the 200-mile EEZ. So they stake that position. But the second answer we got is the more radical answer. And that the water, not only the land, not only the 12 miles, but the waters are considered part because of historic rights. So there is a real debate here on the legal doctrine of historic rights versus UNCLOS. And then they bring in another legal doctrine. Jay can explain all this. It's the intertemporal doctrine. This is the Chinese mind. Intertemporal doctrine, I think, means that what was valid under international law at a certain point cannot be, it's at that time that the international law should apply, not the current international law. So I don't want to go into that. This is the subject of the arbitration and the subject for international lawyers. I just want to tell you that it is not a slam dunk. Our case is not just, it's sure. I will leave it to Jay to discuss the pros and cons, but the point I'm saying is that the Chinese actually have a big debate going internally on the 9-dash line. How to explain it to the international community, because it has been the cause of so much controversy. And it has become actually one, if not the chief problem confronting Chinese foreign policy. What good is it if their foreign policy is successful in making friends with Russia, Africa, Latin America, Europe, but in their own neighborhood, they have all these maritime and territorial disputes that they cannot solve. And that calls into question their overall strategy of peaceful development. In other words, more and more people or countries in Southeast Asia are beginning to think that the strategy of peaceful development has sunk into the bottom of the South China Sea because of their emphasis on the other parameter, on core interests, on sovereignty. So I don't know if I answered your question. So my basic point is that how to manage the dispute, put it somewhat less front of center, and then encourage other areas of cooperation like trade, investment. In other words, there is actually, Secretary Del Rosario says this, the only thing is to put it into practice, not all to compartmentalize one issue and develop other issues. It is not the only issue that should determine Philippine-China relations.
Thank you.
Yeah. Inasa sa akin ni Chito yung fearless forecast question, but I hope you'll understand if I don't make a fearless forecast, no? Because as director of the Institute for Maritime Affairs and Law of the Sea of UP, we are trying our best as well to do some research that we hope will help government in its activities on this, no? I will, however, agree with Chito, and I think it also should be relayed to our people, no, that this is not a slam dunk. No? Even if China is not participating in the arbitration, even if they have rejected it, that does not mean that it will not get its message across, that its arguments will not be considered, that its positions will not be considered. In fact, those positions, those arguments will have to be taken into account by the arbitrators in making their decision, because at the end of the day, the arbitrators, even without China's participation, must make their decision on a basis of reason, on the basis which makes it credible, on the basis of what they see to be the current state of international law. No? And there are always, as you know, in any case, any litigation, you can either win or lose. Okay? And that possibility is still there. No? Kaya siguro ang masasabi lang natin is we still have our work cut out for us even without China's participation. In fact, it's more dangerous nga for the case to be resolved quickly, I mean within the year, no? Because that could be a major problem. It will not be a slam dunk but a sudden death kung ganon.
Okay.
But yun nga, just keep that in mind so that we have a more kumbaga reasonable expectation of this arbitration. It's a hard thing to do, and the battle is an uphill battle. I already said as much even before when they announced the arbitration. You'll find my commentary on this in Rappler.com. No? When I gave an account of what are the possibilities, the options. No? Talagang it's an uphill battle for us, and that's why, in a way, a government needs all the support it needs from our people, but at the same time, it also needs all the assistance, no, in pushing the argument, no, and really establishing the reason behind our action. Hopefully, that is what will then help the other avenues like the diplomatic avenues, the bilateral, the side talks, and maybe even the possibility of amicable settlement. Hopefully, that is what will lay the basis for that. No? But it all depends really now on how government views this arbitration. If it is true that that all of our eggs are in that one basket, no, I think everyone will agree that it's not really a favorable course of action kasi lahat tinaya mo na.
Okay.
So we hope that there are still other avenues that continue to be explored. Now, in the meantime, I would also like to present naman yung pinapapresent sa akin.
Si Professor will give a short presentation. Yung mga kaibigan natin sa media, please bear with us para mas magandang understanding. Pa-request lang, bawasan natin yung ilaw. Pahiram ng mikropono natin dito, Raymond, please. Para magamit ni Professor. Pakipatay lang po ng ilaw.
Some colleagues and I at the Asian Center earlier this year, because of our experiences with Senator Shahani with respect to the white paper, as well as our own engagements like with Chito in China and our years of study on this, really, decided to put together the document that you see on screen, which is a primer on the West Philippine Sea. No? We put this together early this year in order to give our people a brief but comprehensive document that they can look at so that they can be totally familiarized with the issues about the South China Sea and the West Philippine Sea. So I'm just showing to you on screen. This is downloadable. It is a PDF file. You can Google it, just Google primer West Philippine Sea, and I'm sure it will come up. The website is www.philippinesintheworld.org or com. I'm just not sure with the last portion. But that is the one that is hosting this document. No? If you have flash drives, I can also give it to you now after the session. Basically, this document is comprised of several parts. No? We tried to really emphasize that this is a Filipino perspective, and it is not a government document. It is not a government perspective. No? This is totally independent. No? That's why the first thing we have in the preface really is a disclaimer. No? Because we try, as academics, we try to look at this issue from various perspectives, and not all of them necessarily might be what government would want to be highlighted, no? But we feel that it is important as a factual reference. No? First, there is of course the general introduction, and it's designed as in question and answer format, no? So that it's easy to look up. So you have the West Philippine Sea. What is this thing, and how is it different from the South China Sea? And although many people interchange them, they're actually two different bodies of water. And we have inserted also appropriate maps. What are the features in there that are important to us? What are the important characteristics? No? What are the disputes about, etc. So we try to give us a brief and yet comprehensive account of the issue. No? So may background to yung we have various maps. And then we go into each distinct area. Calayan Island Group being the bigger one, most important one. We talk about its nature, why it is important, what are our interests there, no, and some recent history of our activities there to show that we really have been exercising sovereignty and jurisdiction over this area. And and we also have some history of that particular area. No? So when did it become officially part of the Philippines? What our interests, long-standing interests there are. All of this to show the reasons why this area is important to us. Okay? A similar treatment is given, it is updated nga pala up to as recently as last July with the incidents in Ayungin Shoal. A similar treatment is done with respect to Bajo de Masinloc, okay, or Scarborough Shoal. Same kind of structure. Where is it? What is it? Why is it valuable? Why is it important? No? We have some maps and illustrations to show, no, to support the arguments that we have made there. No? And then we also talk about the record of what we have been doing to try to solve this issue. So this is basically a review of our Philippine foreign policy with respect to these areas. No? And we try to emphasize that we have been all these years trying to push for a peaceful and acceptable resolution of these issues. We also put in there some comments on the role of ASEAN, as well as yung proposed COC, and then also deal with international law. No? How this can be viewed what are the international law aspects of this dispute in these areas? Options, positions. Can we bring, ito again, this is the subject of the update of the latest update. There are many questions about the arbitration. No? So what about, can't we just go to court and have the court order China to leave? Can't we, what about China's reservations? All of this is answered and dealt with in this. No? Why is it significant, this action of ours to bring it to arbitration? And then what are our expectations now? We tried to answer this in layman's terms as much as possible. No? So it is easily understandable. We've tried to avoid all the technical jargon. No? And then we have some other parang broad orientation about government and the different government agencies involved. Okay? So yun. Again, I stress that this does not represent a government position, but it is a source of basic information for everyone, which we hope will then allow our people to have one common perspective on these issues, as well as have enough information to have a very lively and productive discussion, a debate about it, instead of what has been happening in the previous decades, where it is only a few people who discuss this issue. No? Yeah. We even have some examples of how similar kinds of disputes have been dealt with in other places in the world. Okay. Now, the other thing I want to show you is a portion of a presentation that I delivered to the NDCP. And this is a basic, again, another basic orientation on the South China Sea disputes, because I always say that if you want to have a good discussion of the South China Sea issues, you must always have a map handy to be able to visualize the complexities of this problem. This is the current status of the disputes in the South China Sea. You have so many lines which represent claims, no, of the different states around the South China Sea. So you have, of course, you can see clearly the so-called 9-dash line here, which overlaps with many other areas that are projected from the neighboring or the adjacent land masses. So here you have the distinct island groups, the Paracels here, which is a dispute between China and Vietnam, and then the Calayan Island group, which is inside this box, no? And the Spratlys, which is actually all of these little squares and circles and triangles here. That is what comprises the entire Spratlys group geographically. And then you have many different lines. Oh, Bahaw Demasinloc is this little portion here. You have many different lines here. The most notable of which is this blue line. That is the 200-mile exclusive economic zone if you disregard all of the islands in the South China Sea, meaning the 200-mile zone is projected only from the mainland, no? And that is what you end up with. All the different other lines are various types of maritime zones that are claimed by the different countries in addition to the EEZ. So you have, for example, here a continental shelf claim, you have, which coincides with an EEZ claim. You have, these are territorial sea lines. No? For the Philippines, officially still the territorial sea is up to here, which is contested by other countries. This is the Calayan Island group area, again, which is also contested by other countries. Then you have here a line here that is a Malaysian claim to the South China Sea. This is the Brunei claim. And then each one of these squares, triangles, and circles represent either an island, a rock, or a reef. And the different colors pertain to different countries. So like orange is Vietnam, red is China, blue is the Philippines, brown here is Malaysian, and the white one are not occupied features, okay? But they could be subject of occupation at some point in time, but right now they're not. So that shows you how complicated the situation is because of so many different overlapping and interlapping claims. No? If you consider only the Philippines and China, then you have this a little bit of a simpler picture. We have the claims to the islands you occupy in blue, and then the reefs that and submerged features that are occupied by China in red. They are all within the Calayan Island group area described in PD 1596. Okay? And this is, of course, the 9-dash line, which overlaps with our claim to a territorial sea under the Treaty of Paris. No? And then this blue line here is the potential EEZ of the country. This, by the way, is the Benham Rice region. Okay. Now, that is the situation between the two of us. Now, assuming we win, if we win the award, the arbitration rather, then actually we are left with a second possibility, and that is that China will then claim, instead of a 9-dash line, the maritime zones under UNCLOS, but projected from all of the islands within the South China Sea. And the extent of that claim If all of them are entitled, for example, to a 200-mile exclusive economic zone, the extent would be that yellow line there. No, again, projected from all of the islands. No? The sovereignty of the features are not being resolved, are not going to be resolved by the tribunal. The Philippines itself says that we are not asking for the sovereignty over the islands to be resolved. So that means that even if the award is in our favor, we still have to deal with this possible new Chinese claim afterwards on the basis now of UNCLOS instead of the 9-dash line. You can see really that it's not that much different from the extent of the 9-dash line claim. Okay? And that really stresses what Chito said earlier, that even after this arbitration is over, we still need to deal with the same issues. We still need to address them probably bilaterally with China. Now, ideally, this is what the Philippines is hoping to achieve, and that is that it is entitled to the full maritime zones up to this area of the EEZ, no? And that each island apparently will have only a 12 nautical mile territorial sea. So you'll notice a big difference between this possible outcome and the current status of the Philippine claim, the current configuration of the Philippine claim. So we're actually moving away from that if we really want a fully UNCLOS compliant system of maritime zones, and if we disregard the effect of the islands. What the Philippines apparently is hoping for is that by doing that, China will also be pushed back to only this area here with respect to the EEZ. No? Notice that this is a Vietnamese area. It will not be involved in the arbitration. No? That is still a totally different case. No? Which means that even after the arbitration is completed, that is now the configuration, that is now going to be the status of the problems in the South China Sea.